Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in this one, I'm going to be going over a current ranking of the ranged DPS specs moving into Shadowlands. Now, note at this time we are in the beta testing phase, so this assessment will more or less be based off of the potential of the spec, the longevity of the spec, so how long does it take before you might get bored of it. I'm taking into account changes or additions to the class and spec, was spec specific, that have been made into Shadowlands. Are these additions going to matter to you? Are you going to feel them and enjoy them as they are likely intended to be? That is the main goal of this. I'm looking to do this for melee DPS and for healers in the future as well, so consider subscribing to the channel if you like this type of content. Again, my main goal with the channel is to give out as much information about World of Warcraft as possible so we can all make the right choices in our gameplay and have success. So let's start this ranking off here. We'll just move in order. We've got Affliction Warlock. Now, Affliction Warlock received a significant portion of its spells back baseline. I'm specifically talking about its curses, Curse of Weakness and Exhaustion, more importantly, and we've got Demonic Circle and Teleport back baseline. There's an extreme amount of mobility and sort of micromanagement that has been brought back to Affliction that brings it to a whole nother level of tier in terms of potential. It's going back to, in my mind, a stage of Affliction that we haven't seen maybe pre-WoD or around the WoD era. It's definitely a lot more thorough of a specialization and has more depth. Some of the downsides is that you may feel stressed on your global cooldowns, which isn't always a bad thing. I guess it can be in this case, where you could struggle to just even maintain everything that you want to on more than 3 targets or 3 and more targets. There is some new honor talents coming in to allow you to apply unstable affliction to multiple targets, so you can get that old affliction gameplay. And right now, the only thing I could see that holds it back in terms of its potential and its fun is tuning. If it ends up getting tuned into a position where it just doesn't do damage, it could totally fall off, right? But the purposes of this ranking list is potential and how much fun. So it's an S tier. Affliction Warlock, in my mind, is going to have potential to be one of the most fun and engaging specs, and will likely, your enjoyment of it will last the entire expansion. There are interesting builds, with Deathbolt going back to being an honor talent to have some burst damage, and with some legendaries for self-survivability through Drain Life, or to make your Demonic Gateway instant cast. There's a huge amount of outplay potential that is been brought back to Affliction, and again, the only thing that could hold it back is tuning. Now we move down to the next specialization here. We've got the Arcane Mage. We see the return of Alter Time, so a nice little cheeky spell, but it's not exactly our old friend Alter Time. It's only your health and your positioning, but still has excellent survivability. Arcane Mage is still one of those specs that is just, if you're a good player, you are impossible to kill. You'll be blinking around the map, and with the addition of Alter Time, blinking even more around the map, it definitely is going to retain a high skill cap in terms of your own personal survivability and what you can get done with the specialization. The dangers of Arcane Mage, and really the dangers of Mage in general, is the Necro Lord Covenant ability, Fleshcraft, with its crowd control immunity. At the moment as a Mage, it can be difficult to get damage to break the shield, to crowd control the target, and still have damage to kill another target, which does leave Arcane Mage in a vulnerable position at the moment, because that's something that I'm not sure if it will change too much, or if any amount of tuning to a mage specialization will help it out too much. But Arcane with Radiant Spark, bringing back sort of that Mark of Alanus style of play, definitely has a bit of a redeeming factor. So it's not too low of a tier, but I wouldn't put it on an S tier. I think it's a little bit too risky. It's still going to be an awesome spec, and it's still going to be a lot of fun, and in the hands of a skilled player, you're going to be able to get a lot done with it. But I think it does run the risk that for maybe the first time ever, Mage, and specifically Mage Rogue, could struggle almost single-handedly just from a Covenant. Moving over onto Beast Mastery Hunters. Beast Mastery Hunter is always a spec that's kind of like, in terms of its overall potential fun, if it's strong, then you have fun because you win, right? It's not the most complicated spec. A lot of your damage comes from your pets. There are some interesting legendaries, like being able to put a tar trap down and then launch a flare into it, and the tar trap goes on fire. Really cool interaction. That's one of the coolest interactions I've really seen from Shadowlands in general, and that's a legendary. But its potential and its longevity for fun, I think, is minimal. If you're someone who plays to win and this spec ends up being strong, then you'll have fun, because it's not that hard to pull off, right? You'll be able to win pretty easily, and if winning is your main goal, you'll have a lot of fun. But if your potential is trying to outplay your opponents or develop your skill over a long period of time in the expansion, I think that's where the Beast Mastery Hunter is going to fall a little bit short, at least when it comes to player versus player. So I'm giving it a lower ranking in terms of its overall fun and its potential for the expansion. Please, no shots fired, literally. I don't need any. I know you've got them, hunters. But Beast Mastery, I think, in terms of potential fun, it falls a little bit short. Moving forward, we've got the Balanced Druid. Where are we going to put this one? I mean, I feel like everybody here is wondering where I'm putting the Balanced Druid now. Balanced Druid had its Eclipse system returned to it. It's sort of a slight modification. So you don't get that same resource bar that you used to get, but they've done a good job of adding its tracking elements to the action bar. In player versus environment, I could see it working out, but it does feel a little bit forced. And in PvP at the moment, it's quite difficult to actually pull off the rotation. Now, of course, when tuning happens and we see some numbers moved around and you've got healers in your games more consistently, perhaps we'll see the real potential of it. The only really fun thing I've found with it is Convoke the Spirits with the Night Fae Covenant, and looking for big burst windows with that Convoke the Spirits. So if you're a random Battleground player, I feel like Balanced Druid is never a bad pick, but if you're a competitive arena player, it has really high potential still, with Typhoon being returned baseline, Ursul's Vortex coming into the fray with Affinity Selection, and Heart of the Wild for healing. It lacks some of the old synergy that it had with Heart of the Wild, like Cenarian Ward or Nature's Swiftness from Mists of Pandaria, but you can still pull a lot off with getting access to Swiftmend instead with the Resto Affinity. It maintains a fun playstyle and a high skill potential. The only thing that holds it back at the moment, and could continue to hold it back, would be its performance from tuning. So to me, the Balanced Druid, I'm putting it a little bit below an Affliction Warlock, just because it hasn't shown itself to be as competitive as the Affliction in that S tier, but it's still really top tier and up there. And hopefully when the tuning phase happens and it goes through, it's still going to end up being just as fun and competitive. Demonology is a specialization that we don't see a lot of. Hopefully this time around it's going to be a spec that will be good. I feel like Demonology has fallen off for some time now. You see them once in a while on the ladder, but in Battle for Azeroth, we all know it's all about Destro locks, so Demonology could use some love, much like Affliction. It's getting all of its curses back baseline, and it's still basically the same. It would be my problem with it from Battle for Azeroth. There's nothing extremely new or engaging, and it's lost some of its touch through the honor talents. Call Observer and Call Fellord were some of the fun additions in Legion to the Demonology Warlock that were sort of a centerpiece to how it worked in PvP, but the damage that they do is just so negligible that you're missing that combo with the Fellord. It would be nice to see buffs to the Fellord in terms of its damage output, maybe reductions in its stunning potential, but I see a lot of what do you want to call them, like blender opportunities, where you could combine this explosive flare, a tar trap with a Fell Lord and like try and light a team on fire. I could see a lot of combo potential with it if there were buffs and tuning done to it. At the moment in its tuning, it's very powerful, and one of the main reasons is Soul Leech for Warlocks is just a shield over time that accumulates. And if you're running Necro Lords and apply Fleshcraft, which is a big absorb that makes you immune to crowd control, right now damage prioritizes the Soul Leech, so you have to get through a Soul Leech shield and then get through a Fleshcraft shield. It takes a very long time to get through the shield before you can actually crowd control the Warlock, and it makes them crazy in terms of their output potential. I'm not sure if this is something that's going to be nerfed in the future, but you can basically get your entire rotation off and do whatever you want, and its damage output is incredibly high with Demonic Tyrant, so its potential is still very high. I'm hoping that with tuning passes, I would put it probably on an A tier. It's not up there with the Affliction Warlocks. It's pretty close in terms of its power at the moment, but in terms of its fun potential, I do think Affliction gets a little bit ahead of it in terms of your actions per minute, your global cooldown management, what you can do outside of cooldowns, whereas Demonology will be a little bit more limited. But Demonology is definitely looking like a top tier spec. Destruction Warlock. This one we probably all had enough of if we've been playing retail at all here moving into Shadowlands, but let's give it a fair assessment, okay? This spec is all known about Chaos Bolts, so it's losing a lot of that punch with the ramping up damage of Infernals and Supremacy, so potentially some of its damage is going to be moved into Incinerate. You can see that with some of the Covenants, so it might not be so heavy-handed into Chaos Bolt. Does that mean that it's going to be more engaging? I'm not sure. Potentially it's going to have more sustained damage, which could be fun, but at the moment it's got insane sustained damage because you're spamming Chaos Bolts out on retail. But moving into Shadowlands, it slows down a lot. There's not really a lot new coming forward other than the curses, which is similar to Affliction or Demonology, but to me it falls a little bit flat. You'll still have outplay potential with the Nether Ward talent and with the Conflagrate roots, and you can run legendaries to get even more Conflagrates if you wanted to try and utilize that. So it does have some outplay potential, but to me it falls a little bit short again of that of Affliction. And I would argue because it's a bit stagnant. We've seen it so much now that anyone that has been playing Destro is that you may begin to get bored of it and fatigued from playing it. So I'm giving it a slightly lower rank in terms of its potential at the moment. Remember, this isn't just tuning and performance potential. This is fun and longevity. Like, will you pick this spec and enjoy playing it the whole expansion? Will you feel like you're always learning and able to improve and get better? And I think it falls short because not enough is changing from the gameplay that you're really going to feel over a long period of time. Maybe you try some of the new Covenant abilities, you'll have fun with that, but after a while you'll probably solve it, whereas Affliction got that big overhaul, so you're going to have a lot longer of a lifespan in terms of your overall enjoyment. So we're going to put it in the B tier. We've got Elemental Shaman here. Elemental Shaman had a lot of spells returned to it. A lot of extra little tiny utilities like the Healing Stream Totem. You love getting a little bit of extra healing to the team. Some abilities that came back like Primal Strike don't make the most sense. I don't feel like you're ever going to get use of Primal Strike as Elemental because you're mostly stomping totems from ranged. If you wanted to Primal Strike them, you'd have to be right next to them, which I'm not sure if that will happen, if ever, or if it's even worth putting it on a keybind, unfortunately. I mean, you could put it on. Maybe it's your only ability you have active at the moment on cooldown to totem stomp a Spirit Link totem and you're in melee range, so maybe it does have a niche use there. We've got Echoing Shock. We've got talents coming in that will basically duplicate your last casted spell, so huge potential for massive earth shock damage. We're moving away from Maelstrom, we're moving back to Fulmination, so every time you cast Lightning Bolt you'll stack up and your next earth shock does more damage, which means it is going to be pigeonholed into standing still and hard casting quite a bit, which could be a downside for the specialization in terms of its performance, but you can still maintain flame shocks, look for instant cast lava bursts, and then when you're left open, try and build up for those big fulminates. But the instant cast damage is much lower, so it runs the risk of not performing too well. But Elemental Shaman still maintains its strong level of outplay with grounding totems and wind shears and off support with Tremor Totem and Healing Stream Totem, so much so that I feel like as an Elemental Shaman player it will take a while for you to get bored of it, and I think that it still has a lot of potential, which is why I'm putting it into the A tier. Should we put it in the A tier? Now I'm debating this a bit. I feel like it could fall a bit flat with the Fulmination and the hard-casted spells. I'm wondering if we should put it in a B tier. Man, those Lava Burst procs, those meatballs, it's gotta be there in terms of potential. Hopefully with some tuning through its way here, then we'll get a better idea of where it goes, and I'll be doing this tier list again once we pass the tuning phase based purely on performance. Fire Mage is getting Phoenix Flames returned to it, and it's going to be getting its kind of older version of Ignite. So when you build up crit damage on a target, the dot Ignite starts getting more powerful. You can use Phoenix Flames to spread that. So with adequate tuning, Fire Mage could end up being like a mix between Legion and Cataclysm. And in my mind, Cataclysm was one of the most fun iterations of Fire. So if they nail that with the tuning, in my mind, if you got Legion, Great Pyroblast, Phoenix Flame build with that old school Ignite spreading, then Fire Mage could be really sick. in terms of its playing potential for the duration of Shadowlands. It still does run the same risk that Arcane Mage does, where the Fleshcraft crowd control immunity, as well as some other crowd control reductions like the Sephu's Legendary and the Kyrian stun and polymorph reductions, where Mage might not end up, if it ends up being viable, it might not be viable for the same reasons it used to be, where it was kind of crowd control and burst damage. They might end up just becoming a do damage kind of spec, which is a concern for me personally, which is why I can't put the Fire Mage on the S tier. I'm putting it on the A tier in terms of its performance. I am a bit worried about all of the different crowd control reductions that are being added as passives that changes the Mage gameplay and kind of dulls it a little bit from its sharp edge that Mage is normally known for. We've got the Frost Mage. Now, Frost Mage, it's like the other Mage specs, it's getting alter time back, but it kind of falls flat. Fire Blast doesn't really fit into it too much. Nothing's significantly changing on it. Its hard casted damage is very lackluster at the moment. It definitely needs a tuning pass to make itself feel more like that blasty Frost Mage with Frost Bolts, because at the moment, from the builds that I've seen, it's mostly just Ice Lance and running around and hoping you can do enough damage while you get annoyed because you can't break Fleshcraft shields. To me, it seems like a very annoying spec to try and play. Not that you can't make it work, but its potential is much lower. And again, I think fatigue from it not much changing, moving from Battle for Azeroth to Shadowlands, gives it a lower rank. In my mind, it's still probably going to have strong compositions and perform well and still be fun within certain comps like Rogue Mage. So it's going to be going on a B tier, along with the Destruction Warlocks in terms of potential for fun in the expansion. But I'm worried about the mages in general. They're in need of tuning, and I'm worried with all the crowd control effects when we get to the PvP testing phase that they're not going to work the way that you're used to seeing them work. Marksmanship Hunter. Now, this is one that at the moment, its tuning is quite insane. It will quite literally one-tap players with aim shot crits. And in my mind, Marksmanship Hunter is a spec that if it's not a top performer, much like the Beast Mastery Hunter, you're probably going to get bored of it. Not a lot of it is changing. It's basically the same thing from Battle for Azeroth. And if its performance in PvP specifically is the same as it was in Battle for Azeroth, we're probably not going to see it at all. And I'm worried that it's a little bit too straightforward of a spec, which is aim shot out, stun trap, aim shot out, you're stationary. I thought some of the Covenant abilities like Resonating Arrow to shoot around walls would be kind of cool, but if the other team never has to run away from you because you don't do anything after the tuning pass, who cares if you shoot them through the wall? They probably don't care. So Marksmanship Hunter to me runs a big risk that if it's not doing big punchy damage, it's not going to be able to win, and then it's going to be really boring and not win. So it's much like Beast Mastery Hunter. Although right now I'm sure people are having a lot of fun on the beta, and there might even be clips of hunters running around just one-tapping people with double tap and aim shots. In my mind, if it gets through a tuning pass and doesn't do damage, there's not really enough to it that you'll be engaged for the entire expansion. Sure, it could be a blast right off the bat with the Covenant abilities, and I'm not trying to talk you out of playing Marksmanship Hunter if you like playing Marksmanship Hunter, but for me, in my personal experience, it's going to fall flat for me quite quickly moving into the expansion. Now, our last little range spec here, we've got the Shadow Priest, and this is one that had a lot of controversy due to its high insanity costs on new abilities like Devouring Plague and your ability to manage between going in Void form and maintaining Devouring Plague, and significant drawbacks with Shadow Word Death. Although we're happy Shadow Word Death is back baseline, it does a lot of damage back to you if it doesn't kill a target, and it's more problematic in PvE from my testing than it is in PvP. From my point of view, playing it in PvP is that once we go through a tuning pass, it has a lot of potential, a lot of cool abilities like Mind Games coming back for the Priest. The Priest in general is getting a ton of stuff for Shadowlands. So it's got all this utility. You've got buffs, purges, mass dispels, life grips, interesting legendary combinations to buff up your pets. In my mind, Shadow Priest at the moment, in terms of I can play this the whole expansion and I'm not going to get bored of it, it's the Affliction Lock tier. It's on that S tier. So this is going to be all the range specs. We've gone through them. We've got Affliction and Shadow Priest currently on the S tier for fun and potential. Arcane, Balance, Demonology, Elemental, and Fire on the A tier for their potential for fun. And then Destro and Frost on the B tier. And Beast Mastery and Marksman on the C tier. Nobody on the D tier. Maybe I shouldn't have even had a D tier, but everybody avoided being the absolute bottom. So moving forward, I'm hoping that we see some tuning, obviously. I feel like Frost Mage, Marksmanship, and BM Hunter are going to rely the most on tuning. If they are not doing pressure and damage, and with all these crowd control reductions, being classes that rely on winning with Freezing Trap and Polymorph, if they can't win with the crowd control and their damage is too low, then they're just going to underperform. And in my mind, there's not enough changing about them moving into Shadowlands that I wouldn't personally have my interest kept in them for very long in the expansion. Other than that, I'm excited about Affliction Shadow Priest. I'm curious to see how Balance and Elemental play out with the reworks to their sort of their power systems, with Astral Power and Maelstrom being gone. And other than that, it's going to conclude it here for our tier list. What's your tier list? I want to know where are you placing the specs so far from what you've been seeing. Let me know down in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel so you're notified when these videos go live. I would greatly appreciate it, and we will see you in the next video.